Superman, the hero's dilemma. The sun was setting over Metropolis, painting the city's skyline in shades of gold and amber. Towering skyscrapers shimmered in the fading light, casting long shadows across the streets below. The hum of daily life slowly gave way to the quieter rhythms of the evening. People were returning home after a hard day's work, families gathered for dinner, and the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. High above the city, Superman floated silently, his cape rippling in the gentle breeze. His keen eyes scanned the horizon, ever vigilant for signs of trouble. He had grown used to this, the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that at any moment danger could strike. For years, he had been Metropolis's greatest protector, an unwavering symbol of hope in a world often darkened by fear and uncertainty. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a tension that even Superman could not shake. His super hearing, attuned to the faintest sounds of distress, suddenly picked up a cry for help. It was a voice, panicked and desperate, from across the globe. Superman's senses zeroed in on the source. It was coming from a small island nation thousands of miles away, where a massive earthquake had struck moments ago. The earth had trembled violently, reducing homes to rubble and turning streets into chasms. Thousands were trapped, their lives hanging by a thread. Without a moment's hesitation, Superman shot into action. In the blink of an eye, he left the skyline of Metropolis behind, soaring across oceans and continents at speeds unimaginable to ordinary humans. The world blurred beneath him as he hurtled toward the disaster, his mind focused on the lives he needed to save. When he arrived at the island, the devastation was overwhelming. Entire villages had been reduced to piles of twisted metal and shattered wood. Fires raged in the distance, and the anguished cries of survivors echoed through the air. Superman quickly assessed the situation. People were trapped under debris. Others were stranded on rooftops, surrounded by the rising floodwaters from the earthquake-triggered tsunamis. Superman sprang into action. With a single motion, he lifted collapsed buildings as if they were made of feathers, pulling survivors from beneath the rubble. He worked tirelessly, moving at superhuman speed, using his heat vision to cut through debris and his breath to extinguish fires. Rescue workers on the ground stared in awe as he moved from one disaster site to the next, his red and blue figure a blur of hope amidst the chaos. Hours passed and Superman barely paused. Every life mattered to him, and he pushed himself to his limits, racing against time to save as many as he could. The island had been ill-prepared for such a catastrophic event, and every second was critical. But as he worked, a sharp sound cut through the cacophony of destruction. His communicator buzzed. Lois Lane's voice came through, filled with fear. "Clark, where are you? There's been a massive explosion in Metropolis. Downtown is in chaos. People are trapped. It's bad." Superman's heart skipped a beat. Metropolis, his home, the city he had sworn to protect. An explosion of that magnitude meant countless lives were in danger, not to mention the risk to Lois and everyone else he cared about. He froze for a split second, torn between two worlds. Here, on this island, people were still in desperate need of his help. But Metropolis, his city, was now in peril as well. Superman knew he was fast, faster than anything on Earth, but not even he could be in two places at once. The weight of the decision bore down on him. He glanced around at the destruction on the island, where families huddled together in makeshift shelters, awaiting rescue. Then, his mind flashed to Metropolis, where the explosion's aftermath could mean even greater disaster. For the first time in a long while, Superman felt powerless. He had always believed that with enough effort, with enough strength, he could save everyone. But now, faced with two catastrophes on opposite sides of the world, he was forced to confront the painful reality that even his powers had limits. His thoughts raced, calculating the best course of action. He could save hundreds more here on the island, but every moment lost meant lives at risk in Metropolis. If he returned to his city, he could stop further destruction and aid in the recovery effort. But the islanders, many of them, would not survive without his help. Superman's chest tightened as the weight of the world pressed down on him. This was the hero's dilemma, the impossible choice between lives, between saving the many and protecting those he loved. He thought of Lois, of her courage and strength, and how she had always believed in him, no matter the odds. Making his decision, Superman's eyes steeled with resolve. He couldn't abandon Metropolis, not when the city needed him most. But he would not leave the islanders without hope. In a split second, he raced to the local authorities, instructing them on how best to organize the remaining rescue efforts. He pointed out key areas where survivors were trapped, using his X-ray vision to identify them. Then, with a heavy heart, he took off, speeding back to Metropolis as fast as his body would allow. As he flew, the world blurred around him, his thoughts consumed by the people he had left behind, by the knowledge that he couldn't be everywhere at once. When he arrived in Metropolis, the scene was worse than he imagined. A massive explosion had ripped through the heart of the city, leaving behind a smoldering crater. Buildings were on the verge of collapse, fires spread through the streets, and panic gripped the people. Superman wasted no time. He swooped down, pulling survivors from the wreckage, dousing flames with his freezing breath, and using his strength to stabilize crumbling buildings. The city had been struck hard, but with Superman there, hope began to return. Amid the chaos, Lois found him. She was covered in dust and dirt, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Clark, thank God you're here. We were starting to think." But Superman's expression remained somber. "I had to leave so many behind," he whispered, his voice heavy with guilt. Lois touched his arm. "You can't save everyone, Clark, but you're doing everything you can. That's what matters." Superman nodded, though the weight of his earlier choice still pressed on him. He finished his work in Metropolis, ensuring that the fires were out and that rescue teams were able to take over the recovery efforts. But in his heart, he knew the truth. Today had shown him the limits of his power. Later, as the night settled over Metropolis and the fires were finally extinguished, Superman returned to the Fortress of Solitude. He stood in the quiet, reflecting on the day's events. He had saved hundreds, perhaps even thousands of lives, but the burden of those he couldn't reach gnawed at him. For all his strength, for all his speed, Superman was not a god. He was still bound by the same laws that governed everyone else: time, space, the inevitability of loss. But he also knew that no matter how many times he was faced with impossible choices, he would never stop trying. He would never give up hope, because that was what made him Superman. And in the end, hope was the greatest power he had.